Okay, so I thought I would create this video that is going to be a very bare bones introduction to the very basics of DNS. And then we're going to go over how you can actually point your domain at the Stammer server so you can deploy your custom domain. And let's first off talk about, kind of what DNS is. Now, if you're not familiar, in order to understand DNS, what you first have to understand is IP addresses. Now, an IP address is just like it sounds, right? It is a number that is the IP address of a web server, so a computer on the internet. Now, every web server, in most cases, gets a public IP address. And obviously, you could, in theory, just copy this IP address, put it into the browser, and visit the machine with that IP address. Now, the web server would have to be set up to respond via its IP address, but some of them are. Okay, but obviously we're humans and we do not want to type in numbers in order to get to a website, right? Early on when building the internet, they of course realized this, and so they designed the DNS system. And DNS, domain name system, is a way to type in a name, right? We're going to be using this example domain that I've bought for very cheap from Namecheap. DNS is cool.help, but it's a way to type in a name and then get routed to a computer's IP address ultimately and visit that computer, right? Now, DNS can be a pain to troubleshoot. The reason for that is because of the nature of DNS, right? It is a distributed system and it's got to propagate. So when you make changes in one DNS server, it's going to take time, sometimes hours, for it to propagate throughout the entire network, right? So that can make troubleshooting these issues quite a pain. It's also a little confusing if you're not exposed to the basics of it. So we've talked about a domain name, right? Let's talk about all the parts of a domain name. So this part here, the HTTP or the HTTPS, that is actually called the protocol. The next part, that is the subdomain. The next part is actually called the domain name. You will also usually hear it referred to as the root domain. This is technically saying that that is referred to as both of these parts, but most usually I hear people refer to that part, the domain name, as the root domain. The next part, .com, .net, .help in this instance, that's called the TLD or top level domain. And you do need to remember these things in order to kind of understand, and point things from a domain name to an IP address. Now, you'll notice I got the .help TLD, top level domain. There is a reason for that. For one thing, it was incredibly cheap on Namecheap, which is perfect for this example video, this tutorial video. But also I wanted to illustrate the fact that, it doesn't need to be 3 characters. It can be 4 characters. It just has to be an accepted top level domain. And there are a lot that are out there at this point. Now, what we're going to do next, we are going to, in order to point your domain, whatever it happens to be, to the Stammer server, you have to add what is called an A record in your DNS settings, okay? That stands for address record, right? It's the simplest type of record to add. So let's go ahead and add that. Now, the first thing you're going to want to determine when you're going to do this is you want to know what subdomain do you want it to run on. You could, in theory, just take DNS is cool.help or whatever your domain and top level domain are, and you could just point that directly at the Stammer server. But then you couldn't have your own landing page or anything like that. So what most people do is they point a subdomain at the Stammer web server. The convention that we use and that most of our customers use is to point the app.yourdomain.your TLD to the Stammer web server. For this example, I'm going to use the AI subdomain. I just chose that randomly, and really it could be anything. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to copy this, and then we're going to go to ChatGPT. There is a cool plugin for ChatGPT you can use to troubleshoot domain issues. It's called ne.tools. And the other great thing is because it's built into ChatGPT, or because it's a plugin, you can use the intelligence of ChatGPT on the data you get back, and it can help you troubleshoot these issues. So I have not set up this A record yet, okay? So we shouldn't expect to see anything, but what we can tell it to do is look up the DNS records for, and we've thrown this in here. Make sure to keep the subdomain there. Okay, so it's using the plugin. Right, and this is what we expected, right? There are no DNS records available for that domain. Why not? Well, because we haven't set them up, right? So let's go ahead and set them up. And while we do that, let's go to Stammer here. I've got this ready to go. We're going to replace this one. We're going to do next. We've got the Stammer, the current Stammer production IP address. Most likely that will not change. And for this one, yours is going to look slightly different, right? Yours will most likely not yet be deployed. So you will see an option here to check DNS settings, okay? But what I'm going to do here is go back, or I'm going to go into the Namecheap dashboard here, and we're going to add our A record. Now, A records are very, very easy to add. The first thing I'm going to do is click Add New Record. And keep in mind, regardless of whatever registrar you're using or whatever you're using to manage your DNS records, it's going to be very similar, okay? So I'm going to click on Add New Record. We are doing an A record, right? Address record. Host. Now, we're going to put in here the subdomain that we want to run this on. Yours may be app. For my example, I want to do AI. So we're going to do AI. And then here's where we put in the IP address that we want to point it to, right? So I'm going to put in the IP address that I just copied, and then we are going to click check to save changes. Now, this should propagate pretty quickly is my suspicion, because this record has never existed. Let's see though if that's true. So let's go back to ChatGPT and let's go ahead and actually ask it to do the same thing. Look up the DNS records for that. Okay, and there are no DNS records available yet. So we're going to have to keep waiting and see when those records show up. Let me pause the video. I'm going to wait a little bit, and then let's see what we see whenever those records propagate all the way to whatever DNS that this ne.tools is using. Okay, and so I actually got tired of waiting for this ne.tools to work. I don't know if it's maybe that plugin is not working or what, but I used another tool that you can use called MX Toolbox, and I simply used their DNS lookup. I threw in ai.dnsiscool.help, and as you can see, we can see that A record already, and it's pointing to the proper IP address. So this is how you can debug this and make sure that those records are set up as you'd expect. Now, you shouldn't see a lot of any other entries really in here. Now, if you actually, yeah, for this one, because it's a subdomain, you should not see anything else in here unless you're doing something else strange with that subdomain. One of you had an AAAA record in there, and that's actually for IPv6. I'm not sure how that got in there. I'm definitely not an expert on IPv6 DNS kind of routing, but you should really only see the A record pointing to the Stammer IP address. Now let's try to redeploy this site. And this is actually referring to the older deployment, as you can see here. We will correct this to do a redeployment situation like this, but we're just going to click on Launch Website again. We're going to give it a moment. We can click refresh in order to see the status of that while it deploys it and inserts the new certificate. Okay, so it has been deployed. Let's click here. We have some instructions. We can click here to visit this. And there we go. The custom domain is now deployed. So that is the best way, honestly, to troubleshoot these issues is to use a DNS lookup tool to check that subdomain and see, can you see a record in there? Can it see a record in there that's pointing to the Stammer IP address? If not, then that may be why it's not working. Also, make sure there's no other strange records that you can see in there. And then finally, if you're still not able to figure out what's going on here, join our Discord or open a ticket, and we will certainly help you get this trouble shot. So that is it. Let us know if you have any questions at all.